Welcome. I declare this meeting open and I welcome the members of the public that are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalakut Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time, and during public question time, the members of the public can ask specific questions on general matters other than those relating to a topic that's on the agenda for tonight. Members of the public are only to ask a specific question and shall not provide any statement or contextual comments relating to that question. Consequently, the official minutes of the meeting will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask shall be at the discretion of the chairperson. There is also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question and or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda, and this will be done prior to Council considering the item. We encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor and not defamatory, abusive or objectionable in language or substance, but rather are presented in a spirit of mutual respect of the Council and the community. And we ask all speakers to abide by the direction of the Chair. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside this chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note that council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and to listen to meetings in real time, providing greater access to council decision making and debate and improving openness and transparency. The live stream of this meeting is available on Council's website, and the recording of this meeting will also be available to view a few days after the meeting on Council's website and YouTube channel. The cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of the members of the public. If a member of the public asks a question and or makes a comment about an agenda item, they'll not be filmed, but their voice will be heard in the live stream and recorded. So please note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. And also, in the very unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden. All right, councillors, we'll go to the agenda now. We've got item number 1 is apologies, and we are all here, so no apologies. Item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, the minutes of the 18th of July 2018, councillors, have been circulated. Are there any questions relating to these minutes? If not, do I have a motion to confirm these minutes? Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Simic to second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We'll move to item 3, which is declarations of conflicts of interest. Councillors, are there any conflicts or interests to be declared at this meeting? There are none. We'll move to 4, which is petitions and joint letters. And we have one joint letter on the agenda tonight, councillors, and that's the pedestrian safety improvements to Post Office Place, Port Melbourne. And we don't have any requests from the members of the public to speak to this. Do you have any questions, councillors, of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Pearl to move and Councillor Simic to second. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Pearl? Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just to thank the officers for coming back to us with a recommendation which is in line with our discussion, which took place at the last council meeting. There were some concerns from the community that around a proposal that was being floated, and we now have the opportunity to come back together, look at all the different options and go out for consultation on those options. So thank you to the officers, and agree with the recommendation as it's written.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Would anyone else like to speak? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So item 5 is the sealing schedule, and councillors, we don't have any documents requiring sealing tonight. So we'll move to item 6, which is public question time. And we have 2 people that have requested to speak tonight. So we've got Mr. Craig Anderson. Hello, Mr. Anderson, if you would come forward, take a seat there, way back there. Pop your microphone on. Not sure why you're so far back, but...
There we go.
There we go. And if you could state your name and suburb and...
My name's Craig Anderson and I'm from South Melbourne. And it's to do with the recent crackdown on the car parking issues in the Coventry, Moray, Tope Street area, and which is for 20 years has been basically unwritten rules, and all of a sudden over the last 3 days we've had a massive crackdown and notification that we will be fined for parking on our crossing driveways in the area. So that's my main issue, considering that we've had the latest works with the Melbourne rail tunnel going on. We've all been affected by that greatly in the Moray Street area. We've had the loss of public car parking in the Tope and the Moray Street area. Large public car park there has been closed and that's going to be turned into apartments. And it's a little bit unique down in our area where we actually have driveways that can cater for 1 car and do not impede on the footpath, and it's been accepted by the business owners in that area, which we have Mealy, Gaganow. It's become quite a high profile area considering what it was 20 years ago, and parking is in absolute dire straits down there.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Quick question. Do you have any ideas or suggestions on how we might be able to deal with this in the short term? Or is there a transition idea, or is it...
Well, certainly to have some grace in those premises that can park a car without impeding on the footpath. That would be some dispensation there, which has been going on for some time anyway, so to bring the status quo back. Also that it's for the council to start providing business permits for... I noticed that the City of Yarra offer business car parking permits. There obviously we don't have any in the City of Port Phillip, but we're ratepayers like everyone else is, so that I believe we should be entitled to a permit like a resident would be who would move into the area. They're entitled to a permit, whereas a business owner who's paying rates, etc., a property owner, I should say, we're not entitled to any parking permits. So I think there needs to be some work done on that over a period of time, but our immediate issue at the moment is just to try and get some dispensation or consideration and bring it back to a little bit of the status quo, really. That's what we're after.
Councillor Simic, did you have a question for Mr Anderson?
Mr Anderson, just a question about, so thank you for coming tonight and bringing this to our attention, whether you've had an opportunity to discuss this with any of the officers already?
I have. The enforcement officers came around last Thursday and they were certainly quite sympathetic to our cause. I have spoken to Richard Scaff, who the letter was, he is your coordinating of parking enforcement. He basically said really it's a council issue on the enforcement. His hands are really tied as far as what the policy and what will be done.
Councillor Crawford.
So my understanding is there's been complaints against the parking, but can I ask, are these just to understand, are there garages that you can actually park in that are so where you're parking on the crossover, but are there garages you can actually park in that the driveway leads into?
Looking at the area now, that of course this is what used to be when they were warehouses and factories and that in the 1960s through, but nowadays of course they've been turned into They've been closed off, they've been changed, the nature of them has changed with the way the area's gone. So obviously the car auto mechanic places, they're probably the main people who have been, let's call it, trespassing and parking and blocking driveways, etc. But it's just changed. So where a lot of them aren't actual warehouses anymore to park cars inside.
Thank you, Mr Anderson. I think we might take that on notice to get back to you with any sort of suggestions for an interim or transition process going forward.
Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much for coming in. Nadine Eagleson, please. Welcome. If you could turn your microphone on, I think it might be off, and state your name and suburb, please.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and councillors. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name's Nadine Eagleson and I'm from the Elwood area. I've come here tonight to put a question to you, and it's a question and a request. The South Park of Elstonwick is now under threat of being taken over for organised football, with pavilions and football lights and fencing to be taken in the off-lead area ovals, and it will change the vista and the general sense of well-being. This is a very well-utilised hub, and unfortunately it comes under Bayside Council, but we've been taking a large number of petitions, and I'd say over half of the people that have signed the petition are Port Phillip residents, as I am, and we were just wondering if you would be prepared to approach Bayside Council in a collaborative way and cooperate with them to try to save the South Park being desecrated, and to find alternative places where they can place the organised football. It's being touted for girls' football to start up, but there's going to be practice every night, and the lights are going to affect a lot of the housing around, and it's just going to affect the vista and the general use of it. The public won't be able to use it when games are on. There isn't a lot of parking, and because it's a soft boundary between Port Phillip and us, and we're just wondering if you could put your heads together, and maybe, because there's so many Port Phillip residents that use it and really want to save that park, if there can be some collaboration for the maybe you've got some facilities like the football park at the end of Pine Avenue, and stuff like that. So I'm here actually to ask if you'd be prepared to make yourselves known to Bayside and say you'd like to collaborate, as happened on the north part of that Elstonwick Park, and try and help us, because it's our backyard. Many of us live in apartments and we're very dependent on it.
Thank you, Ms Eagleson. I do have a meeting with the Mayor of Bayside on Friday. I will raise the fact that we have had a number of people asking for it. This council has done a lot of work in terms of the advocacy around flooding, yes, in terms of Elwood and our municipality, and I think there's been a great result around that. Yeah. It's not so clear-cut, though, when we're advocating, for perhaps a different sort of outcome on a park that's not in our municipality. So, and we're not 100% agreed amongst the councillors either. So I think we'll take this on notice, yes, and we'll get back to you with a formal response on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's the end of the public question time, councillors. We'll go into councillor question time. Do you have any? Oh, no, just before we go into councillor question time, we actually have a presentation of an award. And pursuant to Council's meeting procedural local law, the CEO has requested, and I've given consent to, the adding of an agenda item to the meeting tonight relating to presentation of an award. I'll now call on the CEO to explain to Council the importance of celebrating this award and the process for tonight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, Madam Mayor. The City of Port Phillip 2016-17 annual report was recently honoured with the Gold Australasian Reporting Award. I think we've won silver before, but this was the first time we've won gold. I'm going to call on our General Manager, Mr Chris Carroll, who's the General Manager, Customer and Corporate Service, to give details regarding the award achieved by Council and then present it to you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Madam Mayor. This award is for design and communication excellence in reporting. The annual report is a significant document for Council. Not only is it one that we're required to develop under legislation, but we've taken it beyond that to make sure it's actually meaningful for our community. It's essentially our report card on the performance in the year prior, how we've delivered on our commitments and what value the community has received for the rates and other inputs they've provided to the Council in the year prior, and how we've looked after our assets and finances for the year. And congratulations to all those involved in the process and delivery. There's a cross-council team, and obviously the councillors are involved as well.
Congratulations, that's fantastic. All right, now, councillor question time. So we're on to item 7. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers? There are none. Then we'll move to the presentation of reports. So first up, we have the presentation of the CEO report. Do I have any? No. There are no speakers to this item. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Gross.
Mr CEO, just got a couple of questions. The first one is in relation to the report on the confidential status of some reports. I just wondered if you could talk to us about that. And just to foreshadow that in the list of statutes passed during this period, it obviously won't include the recent legislation about cladding and Council's role in addressing that issue. So could I just ask that we talk about that in the next CEO's report?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, happy to undertake to bring back some further details on the recent legislation around cladding. I'll ask Ms Bennett to address your first question, if that's okay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so at the last council meeting, council actually chose to lift the confidentiality on, I believe it was around 8 items that had been previously considered in confidence, so that in effect takes or reduces the number of items that the council have considered in confidence to about 6%. So it is still reported within your report at a slightly higher rate, but there is a footnote that talks about the impact that council's decision of the previous meeting have made. I'd also would be good to let councillors know that for those resolutions that were lifted at the past meeting, they are actually now available for the public to view on the relevant agenda on our website, so they are now publicly available.
Thanks very much, that's great.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Simic?
I've got a couple of questions regarding some of the measures outlined in the report. Services that contribute to this direction under Direction 1. It says residents' perception regarding whether the City of Port Phillip services contribute to the overall health and well-being of the community is down to 49%, which is short of the target of 67%. I'm wondering if the CEO or one of the officers would be able to elaborate on why this might be the case.
Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so these are the most recent results from a survey that was undertaken of about 900 residents in February or March of this year. It's a perception-based survey, and there have been a range of changes in performance across a number of levels. We're currently at the moment examining all of the verbatim information and really having a detailed look as to what might be driving some of these results. So I'm not in a position today to say exactly what has driven that result, but it is certainly something that we're looking closely at.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. And under Direction 3, we have Smart Solutions for a Sustainable Future. The outcome measures total canopy cover, which is on page 32. That was 2017-18. Has no score assigned to it currently, and the municipal-wide greenhouse gas emissions has a score of 1,704,000 tonnes, but no data for previous years. I'm wondering if I can just ask about those two things.
I can answer the canopy cover question. So through you, Madam Mayor, the canopy cover is a figure that's currently only measured every 5 years. So that's why there's no information for this one. But I might ask Mr Walters to answer the second question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the greenhouse gas emissions profile for the municipality is a project that we undertook during the last financial year, and so the reason we haven't reported previously is because we haven't had a baseline. That number sets a baseline against which we can measure future developments, particularly across the state, and Port Phillip's contribution to that. So that is the bottom line number for the greenhouse gas emissions profile for the entire municipality. We will be coming to Council with some more details around the background to that in the very near future.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is around the format of the report. It's a little bit different from previous reports in that it doesn't specify projects that are off track and that sort of thing in the way that it did before. Could the CEO explain why the format has changed and how this is a better way to communicate this information to the community?
Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so this is the final report against last year's performance. So you would consider it almost an annual report or an annual CEO's report. So the next edition will go back to its normal format in terms of on and off track. So this is really trying to capture a 12-month view. It's not an intent to change the format and the look and feel in this way.
Councillor Copsey.
Yeah, just to highlight for members of the community who are looking at this report, it's a snapshot of the performance, as Ms Bennett has just outlined, and some really valuable data about how Council is progressing towards the goals under our Council plan. And I thank the CEO and the team for such a great document that is clear and transparent about where we're at. I actually had a query about our progress under In Our Backyard. This is under Direction 1, if I'm getting back to my right spot. And I wondered if the CEO could give a quick overview on how we're progressing towards In Our Backyard, and also taking into account the measures that we've got around delivery of social housing units, which currently has a blank for 17-18, how we're tracking towards In Our Backyard, given that figure or absence.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the question. We have recently held several workshops with Council to ensure that the 7 policy levers in our backyard, we're 2 years into that strategy, are being pulled in the right order and to the right strength in terms of where we should be focusing our efforts to increase social housing in the municipality, which is the overarching aim of In Our Backyard. We recently held a housing forum with the local housing providers and some community representatives to look at the changing environment, which is both new state government programs, new changes to the planning system that have potential to increase social housing. In terms of the second part of, and we will be bringing a report back into council with a pretty detailed 12 to 18 months action plan in I believe early September. In terms of the social housing numbers, we are pushing on with the Marlborough Street project, but that is subject to gaining state government funding to put alongside the land that council is putting into that and the money that the PPH, Housing First, are putting into that project. All of these projects rely on state government funding. One of the difficulties there has been the slowness in setting up of the Homes for Victorians fund, which actually relies on, it's a $2 billion fund, but the interest from that fund is what provides the housing, and that's not yet been set up to my knowledge by Treasury, although I should acknowledge we've received some funding from the state government to do the design of Marlborough Street so the project is not delayed.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you for that. And I had a query about one other project in here that's of interest, the Alma Park stormwater harvesting, which I think seems to me to have progressed quite quickly during this term. And I noted that that's come in under budget for this year. I wondered if the CEO could give an update on where that's at and what it's likely to deliver, or an officer.
Ms Davis, you can sit there if you want to.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The project is on track. We're delivering a new stormwater harvesting scheme in Alma Park. We're about to go to tender. We've just finalised the detailed design and we've been working with the schools and other stakeholders. All going well. We'll be constructing over summer to impact only one sporting season at Alma Park and through the school holidays. And we're very hopeful we'll be up and running next April with the new system.
Thank you, Ms Davis. I also have a question I wanted to raise, and that is something, we've got some results here that have indicated a below 50% rating on, which I find really unusual because this is probably something I think we usually do really well, and that's community programs and facilities, and it's the resident perception regarding whether the City of Port Phillip services contribute to the overall health and wellbeing of our community. Our target is 67%, we've got 49. Why? Do you have any idea why that's so low? And what are we doing about it?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so these are the results from the survey that was undertaken of resident perceptions in February or March this year. Council received the results fairly recently, into July. It's a perception-based survey. In terms of the reason for the decline, we have a vast amount of verbatim information that we're working through. There isn't a lot of detail in terms of the drivers that might be sitting behind why people have a perception in that way, but it is certainly something that we're looking quite diligently into in terms of the verbatim that might give us some insight, albeit it is a perception-based survey. In terms of what we might be doing in that space, I'm not sure if my colleague's in a position to respond to that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as part of, and as integrated with the council plan is the Municipal Health and Wellbeing Plan, which contains priority areas for public health and municipal health, including community safety, homelessness, and the general broader health and wellbeing of the community. So we'll be tracking this broader measure along with the specific measures in the health and wellbeing plan, and can report back to council on how those are tracking. Yes, but that will be alongside delving into the detail that's in the broader community survey.
Just on that, Ms Jeffs, are you suggesting that it could have got caught up into the perception of safety and homelessness and what we're doing around that?
Madam Mayor, I think it would be at this stage a bit presumptuous or a bit premature to draw that conclusion. The survey is conducted around February, and there were some community safety issues around that time, so it's possible, but I don't think we'd like to draw that conclusion just yet.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Simic?
If Ms Bennett can elaborate on the community survey that she's talked about. Obviously, some of the findings from the community survey are contained within the report before us, and I assume that some of them haven't been published yet. If Ms Bennett can talk about what the plan for those results is, and maybe even provide a top-line analysis of how we're tracking overall, if that's appropriate at this stage.
Of course, through you, Madam Mayor. So the survey itself was undertaken in February or March this year by an independent surveying firm. It's a telephone survey where people are asked a range of questions on their perception of council activity. There are a number of areas where the council performed well. So in terms of the provision of recreation facilities, the appearance of public areas and support provided through family services, the council performed very strongly. There are also a series of tailored areas of performance where the community were asked for their perception, which helps us with our service planning and improvement. It would be remiss of me not to mention that the South Melbourne market was rated exceptionally well in terms of the performance and the value that the community places on it. This is a survey that is undertaken across a number of local government areas in Victoria. There's a summary of performance at a statewide level available for the community to view on that particular website, and we're currently working through our approach to publishing the council's results more broadly. We've only, while the survey was undertaken in February and March this year, we've only recently received the results and fairly recently briefed the council on the detail that sits within the report. Certainly many of the indicators form part of our reporting requirements through the local government performance reporting framework and are an important part of council's planning process.
Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Simic to second. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Copsey?
Just to reiterate, this is a special edition of the CEO's report with a bit of a report card on council's progress and our delivery to the community of the priorities that we've committed to in our council plan. So I recommend it for anyone who's interested in how council's performing, and thank the team for the effort that's gone in. Maybe we'll win another award this year. We'll have to wait until September, October for the annual report in full, but this is a good preview. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simic?
Yes, thank you everyone for the special edition of the CEO report. On page 41, residents who are proud of, connected to and enjoy living in their neighbourhood, we're measuring at 96%. I think that's a very important measure and encapsulates certainly what I see community's reflection of how council is going. Some areas for improvement for us, many exceptional outcomes that we can be particularly proud of. So thank you for the special edition, and I look forward to continued measuring of our progress.
Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move to item 9, which is the Child Safe Standards, 9.1. And we don't have any members of the community that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Gross to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? No? I will speak to the motion then, and I just have to say that I fully endorse this, and I'm really happy to personally take an active role in preventing, detecting, responding and reporting any suspicions of child abuse to the relevant authorities and maintaining a child-safe culture, especially where I can. I also endorse the whole-of-organisation approach, which is outlined in this document, in keeping a child-safe culture. Unfortunately, just having a policy doesn't mean children will be safe. What we need, well, it really requires much more work to be done. So I think this is a first really good, solid step. Congratulations to the officers, and I urge you to vote for this. Thank you. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And we move to 9.2, which is the CCTV St Kilda Foreshore item. And we've got 4 people that have requested to speak. I'll read them in the order that they're here. Inspector Jason Kelly, please. Welcome, Inspector. You could pop on.
Thank you all again. Jason Kelly, Local Area Police Inspector for the City of Port Phillip. On behalf of Victoria Police, I wish to confirm or reconfirm our commitment to the work the City of Port Phillip are currently doing on the CCTV project for the St Kilda Foreshore. I don't propose to say anything further. I think the matter has been debated obviously heavily, other than to submit, if it's appropriate, to submit my previous submissions that you've all heard, rather than going through those again. I do also wish to tender a letter of support which is dated the 8th of July 2018, which I prepared for the City of Port Phillip to support your applications for community safety infrastructure funding in regards to CCTV, which I believe may have been put on hold now by Council. However, it's a commitment by Victoria Police to work collaboratively with Council on the projects going forward. So if I could submit those 2 documents. Victoria Police is committed to work with Council. We have been working with Council on this particular project, and we appreciate tonight is probably more of a financial decision to be made, but we stand committed to work with Council. We have some concerns around timeframes, with some urgency due to the pending, obviously, summer period. I have liaised with appropriate Council officers and are aware there are procurement policies to be complied with. Really, I only make the submission if, in line with relevant policy, that the CCTV system, if approved tonight to proceed, if it can be available for the summer period, would be advantageous to enhance community safety. So I look forward to working forward with Council, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to clarify any issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector, and we'll accept those documents that you've just tabled.
Thank you.
Councillors, any questions for the Inspector? No.
Thank you.
Mr. Kevin Donovan, please.
Good evening.
Welcome, Mr. Donovan.
Nice to see you again. In a much smaller room this time. I beg your pardon?
Oh, sorry.
No,
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I spoke briefly in favour of CCTV along the foreshore back on the 16th of May, and glad that it got over the line. And as Inspector Kelly mentioned, there is some minor financial issues which I believe need to be sorted out. But I'd like to speak equally briefly about the implementation strategy and specifically the proposed timeline. Now, as a foreshore trader, we have realised a situation, for lack of a better word, of the need for greater safety on the foreshore since December of 2015, now 2.5 years ago, when there were several incidents in the summer months. And now 2.5 months ago, after the passage of a plan, we learned that it will take another 5 months for implementation. Now, really, this is far too long. Daylight savings will occur in early October, and summer will be on us again. The weather will be warm again, and with all due respect, we need, quite frankly, to really get the show on the road and hopefully deliver an earlier outcome than end December. We'd like to see something sort of end-November latest for the foreshore to be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. David Van, please. Welcome, Mr. Van.
Mayor?
The microphone's on.
Yes, it is. I believe it is. Thank you for hearing me tonight on an issue that you all are probably aware that we're
Just
passionate about.
need to state your name again and your suburb, please.
David Van from St Kilda, representing the Friends of St Kilda Hill. We learned today that the CCTV in the Grey Street area should be implemented, or contracts are signed and should be implemented by middle of October. We thank the council and the team for pushing that through. We would have liked it a little bit sooner, but we think that's a great step forward. But we're also concerned about many other areas of St Kilda. We think that there is vulnerable people right across the area, and I've shared with some of you, and I will be sharing with others, probably via the media, some areas of St Kilda that are in diabolical straits, that need the protection of this council, that aren't being protected right now. So the foreshore is just one of those areas, and I will come back to other meetings. I'll talk to this issue for other meetings. But looking at the police's recommendation to be able to save resources to protect people right across St Kilda, and by people I don't just mean ratepayers, I don't mean residents, I mean those most vulnerable, the homeless, etc. It's interesting to note that I think it's about 5 years since the murder of Tracy Connolly in Grieve Street.
Sorry.
Who was
Mr. Van, are you recording this?
Yes.
Can you please turn it off?
Sure.
It's against the rules.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I wasn't aware. It's being recorded anyway, I believe. So, as I said, it's about 5 years since the murder of a sex worker in Grieve Street, Tracy Connolly. Now, that murder has never been solved. Yet, if we look at the murders of Jill Maher, her killer is now in jail, will never ever kill another helpless person, another woman. The killer of Eurydice Dixon is behind bars and awaiting trial, and we can't comment on that. But so there is absolute evidence that CCTV can stop further killings. So I know that there is probably very strong support across the councillors for this motion tonight. I know that there'll probably be some councillors try and water this down. But I'd like to ask them to really think about Tracy Connolly, her family, and the vulnerable people in Grieve Street, the sex workers, the homeless, and everyone else, that they're going to walk away and not leave protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van. And lastly, Mary Stewart, please. Welcome, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Mary Stewart. I'm a resident of St Kilda. I'm a resident of the St Kilda Hill area, indeed, and I also work in St Kilda, and I'm responsible for the operation of Luna Park. I speak tonight in all those capacities, and also on behalf of the Foreshore traders in conjunction with Kevin Donovan and the other traders on the Foreshore area, and also on behalf of St Kilda Tourism and Events. I would very briefly want to support the recommendation before Council in terms of the funding for a very small amount of funding for the implementation of the project and the maintenance of the CCT cameras. I also would like to place on record our very deep concern with the fact that the CCTV cameras will not be in place under the current proposal until the end of December. We would urge the Council to do everything that they can to bring that forward. And we have been discussing these issues and a range of other issues relating to safety in the Foreshore area for many months, many months. And I would urge the Council to do everything that they can to bring forward the deployment of the CCTV cameras on the Foreshore before we hit another period of summer with the potential issues relating to public safety that is likely to bring with it. I'd also, for the record, like to note that my concern that the proposal and the offer to also extend the CCTV camera to the Luna Park forecourt and to Ackland Street has been put, not adopted by the Council and has been put on hold and is not going to be considered until sometime next year. They're the only things that I wanted to say, Madam Chair, and I would urge the Council to approve the very minimal funding required and to do everything that you can to bring forward the implementation.
Thank you, Ms Stewart. That's the end of the public questions on this item. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford.
So I'm just going to clarify with the timeframes. Is the delays in the usual putting out to tender, and then is there any way that, assuming this passes tonight, that we can bring it forward for the start of summer?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I just want to take that on notice because it will involve looking at our procurement rules. I was just trying to ask Mr Carroll the same question, but we will endeavour to bring this forward as quickly as possible if Council passes the resolution tonight.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions as well. Is there anything you can answer on whether we can tighten the timeframes around procurement? Can it be tacked on to the existing procurement that's just been awarded, or is there anything that you can talk about?
Mr Carroll may help here, or is there Lachlan?
Mr Johnson.
Sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, with regards to the procurement, our timelines have us at the beginning of December, but as you're aware, complying with Council's procurement policy does make it difficult to bring that forward any further.
And through you, Madam Mayor, from my initial discussions previously, it would be hard for us to argue exemption to our procurement policy under the legislative framework that we currently operate under, but we will double check that again after the next one.
Okay, so for everyone at home that couldn't hear that, but it will be double checked, and it's hard to apply for an exemption at this stage. Okay. I'm also wondering, if I can ask a question, has there been any community communication that's been received that we should be aware of or should be taken into consideration? We've just had 2 that's been submitted now. Is there anything else that we should be aware of?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there has been no other communications apart from, I guess, the extensive consultations that we heard when it was debated in May. And, we've heard tonight that support is consistent with tonight.
And the other question I have is the increase
in the spend, being the two lots of $12,000, one being absorbed and the other. Why isn't that in the resolution? Why isn't that specifically detailed in the resolution? Through you, Madam Mayor, the resolution does make note that calls on Council to dedicate resources for project management and maintenance. The actual figure amount is provided in the financial section. Is that because is it not there? Because normally we're very detailed on figures. Is it there because that might be your style, or is it because it might change? Through you, Madam Mayor, it's not that the amount will change. That is based on the formula recommendation that project management is of an overall project. There is no reason why it's not provided in further detail. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, this is an officer recommendation, so there's no reason why the council resolution couldn't detail it. I would just caution, though, if it happened to be $12,500, that we wouldn't want to need to come back to council. That would cause further delays. So,
thank you, Ms. Jeffs. I just thought it was different. Councillor Crawford. Okay. Is there any other questions? Then, Councillor Crawford, you would like to move this motion, and Councillor Bond to second. Councillor Crawford.
So we've had the debate. I just urge my fellow councillors, let's get on and agree to fund the maintenance and the project management required, and I look forward to hopefully that there may be some time frame to move it forward so that we can get on with the business and look after our community.
Councillor Bond.
CCTV on Fitzroy Street is working well. Sorry?
Excuse me, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Bond has the floor. Can you please not interrupt?
CCTV on Little Grey is progressing nicely, and I welcome the news that the contract was awarded today to someone to install those cameras. We recently installed CCTV at the Town Hall to protect both officers and councillors. I have CCTV at home. It would be rather hypocritical of me to sit here and deny that same protection to the community that I enjoy at home and at the Town Hall, and that all councillors enjoy at the Town Hall, and I'm sure some others of you enjoy that at home also. So for that reason, I strongly support this recommendation from the officers, and hope we just get on and install this as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Gross.
Madam Mayor, councillors, I'm going to support this motion, or whatever motion gets put up. The only thing I need to put on the record is my rage and anger that this is another cost shift. Now, it's a tiny cost shift, so let's just suck it up and spend the dough. But I am incredibly upset about it, because one of the rules is that one tier of government can't do the work of another tier of government without going broke. Policing is a matter for state government, and this is an aspect of policing. The state government recognise this, and they fund this particular activity. But, you know, this is classic state government, that they, you know, only partially funded or not fully funded. And, you know, I've got a personal obsession about cost shifting from one tier of government to another. So I am cross with no one other than the Department of Justice for having inflexible rules around it. We should be allowed to use some of the money for maintenance and planning and all that sort of thing, and baseline statistics collection. But I'm just sucking it up because it's a tiny amount of money. But I would, you know, we can't roll out this facility to the rest of Port Phillip without full and complete funding from the state.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Simic.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make an amendment or raise an amendment if possible, please.
Certainly, if you could read your amendment.
Just 2 points to include as part of this motion, a 3.2 and a 3.3. So 3.2 requests officers to carry out baseline crime statistics data collection for the local St Kilda Foreshore area prior to the CCTV installation. And 3.3. So it's not the... I can read out 3.2 again if you like. Requests officers to carry out baseline crime statistic data collection for the local St Kilda Foreshore area
Point of order, Madam Mayor. Given this amendment is going to change the nature of a decision we've already made, I would suggest this should be an alternate recommendation rather than an amendment to the existing recommendation before us.
You think it's too substantial? I'll just seek advice on that. Okay.
Depends on,
Governance has just told me that it is substantial. I'm not asking for a debate right now, I'm asking for advice.
I can finish. And 3.3, request the Mayor to write to the Minister for Police it's just picking up on Councillor Gross's point, regarding the financial impacts on local government of this and similar funding requests.
Thank you. In one moment, Councillor Brand.
Through Madam Mayor.
Oh.
Sorry, did you want the advice? Sorry, apologies. You asked for the advice. We believe this should not be an amendment but an alternative motion. The advice I have from governments is that if 3.2 doesn't go ahead, it can knock out 3.1 in essence. So there should be an alternative motion, not an amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Brand, I'll hear what you're clarifying. Do you want to turn on your microphone?
The way that this proposed clause is written is ambiguous. One way of reading it is that we carry out a survey of crime on the foreshore before we go and install the CCTV. Another way to read it is we carry out a survey of crime on the foreshore that happened prior to the installation of CCTV. If it's just prior to the installation of it, we're saying we install it now, we do a survey of the crime that happened before. That doesn't change anything. If it's saying we don't install it until we do the survey.
I understand, Councillor Brand. I'd like to ask Councillor Simic, is it your intention to delay potentially...
No.
That this might delay the installation?
No, my intention is not to delay the installation. It's what Councillor Brand's outlined.
Then I'll re-seek advice. Excuse me, I cannot hear the advice from the chatter. Can we please be... So the advice is, as read, it should come as an alternative motion, Councillor Simic, so you could put it in as a matter arising, if you like.
Can I ask, Madam Mayor, which part of... So the text is not up there anymore. What I heard before about whether it hinders 3.1 from taking place or not, that's certainly not the intention. So can we change the wording in order to ensure that the data collection happens in a way that does not prohibit 3.1? So even adding the words, this is not to delay 3.1 from happening.
I think we could ask for some help.
Through Madam Mayor, if you took the word prior out and you put in addition to the CCTV installation, or something like that, would be clear that it's not to delay 3.1, because you've got the word baseline, so that wouldn't delay 3.1, and obviously a baseline is trying to get some data before the CCTV installs, but it doesn't preclude 3.1.
So if you want to type that up, and we'll see if we've got a seconder for that. So that sounds like it's not substantive change. Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Simic, please speak to your motion. You can ask a question now, Councillor Crawford.
So I guess I'm asking the officers, and maybe having Inspector Kelly in the room will also help. Are we able to, through the crime stats or the information data, isolate the foreshore from any other parts of St Kilda? Like, are we actually able to do it before we put it in a motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that data is available through the Crime Statistics Agency, and we can make a geographical selection on the particular boundaries of the foreshore. We have already obtained that data in the past, and so we can do that on recurrent years to gain a measurement over time.
Thank you, Ms Cox. So, Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor Voss. I don't intend to re-prosecute the merits of CCTV. I think the debate's moved on. What this does, it doesn't water down the resolution anyway, it doesn't stall the resolution anyway. It simply puts up the opportunity for us as a council to continue to make evidence-based decisions, and part of that means collecting data and information that allows us to know the status quo so that we can, down the track, evaluate and make sure that the program has been successful. It also picks up Councillor Gross's point, which is that a cost shift has taken place. It's not a lot of money, but we've got to be very clear about the impact that that has on council's operations going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of months ago, this council made a decision to go ahead with this project, essentially casting aside pragmatism and evidence-based decision-making in favour of a purely ideological approach to safety. That's fine. That's been done. The decision that we made at the time was to do that on the proviso that the state government cover the running costs. It was very clear in the motion there that we would do that on that proviso. They've now said that they don't want to do that, and it's a small amount of money, but we're now going to roll over and go, okay, that's a terrible precedent. I agree with Councillor Gross that that's who knows where this is going to go in the future. I can see us being asked to pay for all sorts of things that are announced by an MP who wants to, make a splash, which is fine because council's going to pick up the tab. That's a serious issue, and I don't want us to make any kind of habit of that. And we'll all say that, but the real risk is that we will make a habit of that. Because we'll be pushed into it and bullied into it. So what I would say is that one of the main issues that I had with the decision that we made a couple of months ago was that we deliberately decided not to gather data to show whether this would work. One of the good things about the Fitzroy Street trial is that we're gathering data, we're reporting on that. You don't spend money unless you actually figure out whether it works. And we deliberately shot down amendments to the motion to try and actually get that. This is now an opportunity for us to just get some baseline data. Let's figure out whether this stuff is actually going to work, and we have the means to get that. So it's pretty basic. I'm very angry about the cost shift, and I know this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's to come. The law and order agenda is going to be pushed onto us, and we're going to be forced to pay for stuff that we shouldn't have to pay for. But I'll support this motion, obviously.
Councillor Pearl.
So it's a clarifying question of officers. When it says here baseline crime statistic data, and then you said it would come from the State Crime Statistic Agency, just on the event on the 14th of December where there was upwards of 100 people riding on the foreshore. So far as I understand, there's only been 2 people that have been charged, arrested, no one charged. There was 100 people riding on the foreshore. What would be the statistics that represent that in that data from the event?
Ms Cox. Through you, Madam Mayor, the crime statistics that are available through that agency around victim reports as well as crime reports, which will result from arrests. There's also O call-out data, which we can make a separate application for. But I'm also, very happy to add what other data Council can collect into that baseline, as we are doing for the Fitzroy Street evaluation. And that includes things like council data, complaints to council, other forms of data.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to this amended motion?
Yes, I won't be supporting this amendment. This is nothing but an attempt by the Greens councillors to water down a motion that they will then turn around and vote against in about 2 minutes' time. So I urge my fellow councillors, don't fall for this. Let's go back to the original motion and get this done.
Point of order, Madam Mayor. Can I ask Councillor Bond to demonstrate in what way this waters down the original motion? Demonstrate it, please.
So
no, please
excuse
demonstrate.
me,
Don't just
Councillor
say
Baxter,
things,
what is your
them.
point of order?
So my point of order is that a false is just lied.
No, ask me.
Okay.
And
Madam
I'll make
Mayor,
the decision.
Madam Mayor, I would like councillors, when they actually make statements in the chamber, recorded and in front of the community, to make truthful statements. Can you please enforce that?
Madam Mayor, if you're going to enforce that, you'll have to ask Councillor Baxter to retract his entire
Bond.
speech
Thank
from
you.
before, where he accused us of ignoring evidence.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. There is no point of order in this case. Councillor Brand.
I'm going to support the amendment. I think it does absolutely no harm to the principal clause, which is to put this funding in to support the CCTV cameras. It's just research that I would have expected us to do anyway. It's stuff. If there's any contention about the way CCTV cameras work, I think we need to be provided with. We need to provide ourselves with statistical data. Writing to the Minister, I think it's a very valid point that Councillor Gross and Councillor Simic both make. I see no harm in this amendment at all, and a little bit of good.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to the amended motion? The amendment, I should say. Then, Councillor Simic, would you like to close, given there's been some debate? Then I'll put that motion, the amendment, so we're only voting on the amendment, just to be clear. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried.
Division required.
Councillor Bonds requested a division, so I ask you councillors to vote again on the amendment only. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Brand, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl. That motion's carried. That has now become the substantive motion, as you see on the screen. So we've had Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bond, Councillor Gross speak to the substantive motion. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Mayor Voss. I just want to remark on the fact that I believe it's our responsibility to make evidence-based decisions and to do that based on evidence available to us. I've talked about this a lot in the chamber. I'd like to make the point that I think it's very disappointing when councillors don't share that same enthusiasm for our role as councillors to make the best possible decisions that we can. I'm not talking about CCTV, I'm talking about collecting evidence, a point that we can refer back to later down the track. But my personal views around CCTV, I think, are well known, particularly in instances where the evidence doesn't quite stack up. So, like I said, I don't want to re-prosecute whether CCTV is good or not and the sort of impact that it has on our community, but would like to make that point. So, thank you, Mayor Voss.
Then I'll put that motion. Oh, sorry. Apologies. Would anyone else like to speak?
I said let's get on with it, so please, guys, no more discussion. Let's just vote.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I'll also just say that, look, we've gone through a lot this year together, ourselves as councillors, with the community, the traders, with the government agencies, and this has really tested and put under stress our own relationships with all of those. I'd just like to, in particular, thank the councillors, I think, for continuing to have good, robust conversations with each other. Also like to thank Inspector Kelly, the traders and the community that continue to come out. We really do appreciate it. I am quite keen that this small request is approved, so I urge my fellow councillors to support it. Unfortunately, the Department of Justice has a policy that means that none of the money for CCTV can be used for maintenance or project management. And nothing we could do, or the organisation could do, could undo that policy. So I also wanted to just make clear that I will continue to make decisions based on merits and not based upon precedents that have been made. And I don't believe that in making this tonight we'll set a precedent. Yes, it's an experience, but it won't change, how we go about making our decisions in the future. St Kilda is a really popular place. It is the most visited and the most popular tourist destination outside the CBD, outside Melbourne. I think we have to realise that, and this is needed We've heard it very loud and clear, so I urge you, all councillors, to vote. Councillor Crawford, would you like to close?
I just want to iterate to the community, thank you for turning up again and having these discussions again with us, because we do appreciate your time.
Thank you. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's
Division
carried.
required.
Councillor Pearl. Excuse me, Councillor Pearl, we're in the process of...
The third time he's done that.
Can you please vote again? Councillor Bond has requested a division. I'm going to ask you to vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Brand, Councillor Bond, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic. That motion's carried. Excuse me, Councillor Pearl. This is a warning. Thank you. We'll move on to item 11, which is sustainability. We have two items relating to this. Item 11.1, which is the submission to the State Water Policy. And we've got two people that have requested to speak to this item. Mr Isaac Herman, please come forward. Would like Mr Jeffrey Love to speak first? If you could work it out between yourselves and let me know. No problem. Welcome, Mr Love.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jeffrey Love, St Kilda. It may surprise you to learn that Mr Isaac Herman does not wish to speak to this item. He's later on the menu. Well, thank you, Mayor, councillors and officers for this opportunity to address you, surprisingly enough, on a matter regarding water, the City of Port Phillip submission to the State Water Policy. And on behalf of the Elwood Floods Action Group, I would like to thank the City of Port Phillip officials Tim Geffen and Sam Innes for this submission. It's good work. It's pleasing to see recommendations including water-sensitive urban design in planning provisions with onus of proof on developers to comply, covering details like contamination from flooded basements and clear, compelling regulatory requirements. I note that Melbourne Water and councils are not mentioned in compliance regulation. It may be that this was outside the scope of the issues paper. If I could take one major issue as an example, that is the trunk sewer in Elwood, which is designed to take in stormwater for flushing purposes. Today, this means that a release of raw sewage into the bay whenever there is sufficient rainfall, making local beaches unswimmable for extended periods. This is a serious health and amenity issue, and I'd ask, is there a remedy for this event in the draft State Environment Protection Policy brackets waters, close brackets? One would think that a broad title like that, State Environment Protection Policy brackets waters, would cover things like release of raw sewage into the bay. So if in fact this is not covered by the proposed new regulation, perhaps the officers could elaborate on why not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Love. Very good question. Well, a councillor may take up your question now. That's the end of... Councillor Gross, would you like to take up Mr Love's question?
Could I just ask that the officers help us out with this issue about sewerage and the bay? Good question.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The SEP itself contains provision and details the responsibility of the water corporations with respect to this matter of stormwater infiltration into sewers, and describes their responsibilities with respect to risk management and infrastructure upgrades and prioritising that. And it has a containment standard aim in it of being able to take a 1 in 5 year rainfall event. Our submission does not specifically comment on that, which is clause 27 on page 26 of the SEP for your reference. However, we could amend it to amend the officer's submission to call for strong enforcement of these provisions if council would like to do that, though the officer opinion is that the SEP itself does cover this element pretty strongly. And I would actually invite, is there anything you'd like to add to that, Mr Ennis?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think the SEP itself does contain the relevant level of detail. It's more a question of the regulatory framework which sits beyond that is at question here, rather than the SEP itself. And so if there was to be a response, it would probably be more in that regard where we would be advocating for better regulation of the SEP.
Mr Innes, if I can explore that, what you mean, is that like the EPA testing out between December and January and making it year-round, or widening that? What is it that you mean by that regulation?
So the water corporations have requirements where they need to report when there is a sewer overflow to the stormwater network, and they have certain requirements around that. So the question is, are they in compliance with the SEP or not? And advocating that they have better compliance with the SEP, I guess. And that's right. So that's an EPA responsibility to ensure, in conjunction with the water authorities, the compliance with their requirements, not to discharge, to have that containment standard of a 1 in 5 year storm event. So it's more just about ensuring that the water corporations are in compliance with the regulation.
So are you confident that the SEP will stop this issue of raw sewage getting into the bay, for example?
It's not actually the SEP itself. The regulation is it's the enforcement of the regulation. Yeah. So the SEP, as it stands, I would have to check, but I'm pretty sure that it hasn't changed in terms of the requirements. So it really does come back to the regulation of the SEP itself. So that's how the EPA enforces the State Environmental Protection Policy.
So is there anything further that we can do in this document to make it clear that we want it stronger?
I think we can certainly add commentary that says that we really think that it's a problem and that it should be enforced more rigorously, would be one option.
All right, sounds good. Do we need to change anything in the recommendation for that to occur, or can you do that under...
We can do that through updating our response, through updating the submission and then sending an updated submission.
Okay. Councillors, any other questions?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we might need to delegate that authority to officers to make minor amendments to the submission, to the CEO, sorry. And
okay. So if there's no other questions, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation, which we're going to add a small
clause that can be made. So Councillor Copsey to move that and Councillor Crawford to second. We'll just wait till that gets written up.
Yes, I'll move it with the amendment.
Thank you.
Foreshadowed.
So Councillor Copsey has moved. Councillor Crawford, just confirming that you're seconding. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you to the officers. These are really crucial. These policies affect our municipality in very, very big ways. We absolutely, as the submission notes, at the core of Port Phillip is water. It surrounds one part of our municipality. It runs through and it runs over parts of our municipality very frequently. So it's, I've read these submissions. I think that they're very sound. And I also note that where Port Phillip has been developing best practice controls within our own municipality, we're quite clear about the need for statewide policy and regulations to not water down the advances that we've made locally. So I thank officers for the effort that's gone into these submissions, and I'm very happy to endorse them.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Crawford.
Speaking as one of the swamp/canal ward councillors, these two upcoming water reports are fantastic. And the three things I'd like to point out that, thank you to Sam and Tim, it's fantastic. But the three things that particularly took my eye is that we are asking this requirement for stormwater management to be extended to other authorities like Vic Roads, who control some of the areas and drainage in our system, which I think is really important. We can't manage our drains if they don't manage theirs, so I think this is a really crucial thing for the future. And also, as we note, we are downstream of a creek catchment area, so looking at what statutory requirements that are involved in the planning assessment process and looking at that wider view are very important, and also new funding mechanisms, because if we're going to upgrade the drainage and deal with some of the oncoming climate change induced or intense weather events and that flooding, we are going to have to really upgrade and look to new things and new technologies. So I thank you very much for this report.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like to speak? Then if not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So the next one, 11.2, which is the Integrated Water Management Forums, Dandenong and Yarra Catchments, Strategic Direction Statements. We don't have any speakers. Councillors, do you have any questions? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Baxter to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, look, I won't go on and on, because this is, we're talking about water in two motions after another. But I do just want to point out that it's really good to see that the Elster Creek catchment, the Elstonwick Park North actions have been included as priority projects, and that this is just another example of the continuing sort of getting on board of different agencies and stakeholders in this incredibly important project that sort of barely existed, not too long ago, and it's been amazing to see the progress that has been made in this area, due in no small part to the advocacy of community members throughout the City of Port Phillip and Bayside and Glen Eira, as well as the councils of all four catchment councils. So really, really good to see that there.
Thank you. Councillor Gross. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Crawford.
Just want to point out in this report, I love that it is addressing that water knows no boundaries, so looking at the geographical crossing points rather than thinking it's our little section that we've got to work on, and it's the big picture.
Any other speakers? If not, I will put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 12, so planning, 12.1, which is Amendment C151, 77 Park Street, South Melbourne, and this is the permanent heritage controls, consideration of the submissions and adoption of amendment. There are no speakers to this. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand.
I just want to note that the final arrangements for this, which saw some discussions and concessions made and negotiated with the owner of the site and the council's proposal of or the recommendation, I think have ended up with a really good result. It was a very, very difficult situation for the owner of this site. It was very, very harshly, not harshly, what's the word? He was imposed on, I think for a good reason. I mean, for a reason which I fundamentally believe in, which is heritage protection. But it was very difficult for him, and I'm really, really glad that this came around and was negotiated collaboratively in the end, and that when we approve this, if we approve it, it goes straight to a permit and not through another round of more process after that. So at least that saves him a month or so, whatever it is. So I'm happy about that. And it's a very, very good outcome for our community. A church building of this size is and elaborateness is a real mark of a community. Community puts their biggest efforts into the things that they really believe in, into the buildings that they really believe in. This shows, you know, a huge belief, I suppose. It's a material demonstration of a huge belief of a community at a particular time. And we don't get much better demonstrations than what's left in a church building like this. I'm really glad that we've managed to keep it for future generations to admire, if not necessarily believe in the same things. So I'm very happy.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Pearl?
Further support those comments there, and just to provide support to councillors. This is something we can be proud of, and it's just sad that we couldn't do this on the London Hotel and didn't get the same level of support from the state government, and it begs the question why that didn't occur. This is a very special building, but there was obviously a very similar case and a special case for that site down there, but that unfortunately has been lost. I'll reiterate Councillor Brand's comments about the owner of the site, who's been, well, let's face it, I think they've been disadvantaged, but the community's been advantaged, and this is a nice balance between being able to develop a site to increase the density of property in a place that can handle density, given the building that is adjacent to it, but still hopefully keeps the heritage characteristic of the area. The only sad thing is probably the childcare centre spots are going to be lost, but the market seems to react belatedly in the past few years to increase supply, particularly in Tope Street and along Albert Road. So councillors fully support this, and hopefully you do too.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? I'll also add my voice to it. Reading through the documents, it really has an incredible history, and some of it I certainly didn't know, so it's quite interesting. I would like to congratulate the officers. This is a really terrific outcome, that the sole remaining objector has withdrawn their submission, and as a consequence, this no longer needs to go to a planning panel to resolve the process. I'd like to thank the 23 submitters and acknowledge the goodwill of the owner. Amendment C151 will have a positive social effect through the preservation of a historically significant place for the benefit of the current and future generations. So I also urge councillors to support this motion. Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And we'll move to 12.2, which is the Victorian Pride Centre Amendment, C149, the submission to the independent advisor. There are no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Brand to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion? (12.2) is the... Oh, it's in a separate late. If you could just pop on your microphone.
Oh, look, I'm moving this motion with a great deal of enthusiasm and appreciation. It's a long and convoluted process that we're going through, which has been shortened dramatically in certain ways as well. I'm not making a political joke there. I think I don't. Anyway, it's such an important project to our community and to Fitzroy Street and to the city, and it's a very complicated planning sort of knot to untie. It's because there are so many different aspects to it, and it has to go to it has to be a planning amendment for a whole lot of reasons. And I think we've done a pretty good job of simplifying it and unravelling it a bit, and making having a very good public consultation to it. I think we've given it a lot of opinion, a diversity of opinion, which I think has all been fed into the process. And at that stage, I think I'll just leave it and reserve my right to close and see what people have to say. But I highly commend it, and I look forward to this being passed and moved on down the process.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Copsey.
It's an important part of the process. Council is looking at the feedback received so far and basing our submission on the analysis of that feedback. I'd like to note it's been broadly consistent and very supportive of the establishment of the Pride Centre, and there have been some good points raised regarding the design by community members. So I think that the submission has done a good job in summarising that feedback received so far. It's really heartening that people have taken the opportunity in the community to participate in the process that's been set up, and I have no doubt that we're going to see a great design for the Pride Centre based on this outcome. I'm very happy to support the submission as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak? I will also just briefly speak, and I am looking to endorse Council's submission to C149. I'm also looking forward to seeing what the advice of the independent single panel expert comes back with, and with his recommendations on the areas of contention. Just to outline, those areas of contention, in particular what was raised with the community, included the building height and setbacks, the portico, safety issues related to Jackson Street and the underground car parking provision, and proposed licence area. So there's some of the key topics that have been raised with us, and I think our submission addresses them all very well. And I just wanted to note as well that we have very tight timeframes, and I think it's been really important to council and councillors that there's been proper and adequate consultation. And I think that's occurred over the last month with the community, and the concerns are well documented and raised here. So I think that's all been handled very fairly. So I'd just like to congratulate the officers and their work that they have done in making sure that's all been carried out fairly. So I also urge all the councillors to support this motion. Councillor Brand, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Voss. I thank you for putting that so well, actually. I attended 6 hours of public consultation on this and listened very, very carefully to what people were saying, and I've read many of the submissions, and I think that this document, our recommendation to the independent advisor, is a very well-balanced one. I think it reflects the community's overwhelming almost unanimous, I think, support for the Pride Centre in general and the project, and a very strong support for many of the more, even on the contentious things like, you know, height, setbacks, the portico. There was generally speaking, I think that the community had a very strong, positive, generous attitude to that. For instance, the portico, I think people raised issues, but there was a general feeling of enthusiasm for it, and I think that our balanced submission reflects that. That council, as well as the community, I think feels very strongly towards pretty much everything that has been proposed, with an acknowledgement that there are lots and lots of details to be sorted out, lots of issues to be resolved, things to be thought about, and advice to be taken still. But I think that's well reflected in this report, and I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to the notices of motion. And councillors, we have one notice of motion tonight, which is documented as 15.1 from Councillor Brand regarding the Catani Memorial Clock Tower. And we have received one request to speak, and so I'd like to call on Mr. Isaac Herman, please. I'm sure he wants to speak to this one. If you could pop on the microphone, Mr. Herman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors, council officers. If governance could circulate these images amongst the councillors, thank you. So, Isaac Herman from Elwood. I do wish to thank this council on behalf of the Carlo Catani Centennial Commemorative Committee, in particular the Arts and Heritage team for their facilitating of our inaugural meeting, their curating of a number of exhibits, and for their ongoing support. And, as I understand, also a thank you to the Neighbourhood Grants Program for their contribution to the Catani Family Headstone Fund. Thank you. Carlo Catani may have retired after 40 years of public service in 1917. Though he never resigned from his position on the St Kilda Shore Committee, he was with us till death. Always doing and giving more than expected, Catani gave £1,400 out of his own pocket to the Shore Committee to complete local works. He went out to encourage local beach life-saving, and even went out on flood relief missions to provide flood boats and supplies to a beleaguered Gippsland. His very first work was the reconstruction of Beaconsfield Parade. His next project was the reconstruction of a subsiding Canterbury Road. And his last endeavours focused, of course, on our endearing Foreshore. To all appearances, it may well have been Carlo Catani who was actually responsible for the initial gazetting of the St Kilda Marina Reserve in about 1895. Councillors, on the 22nd of August 1932, at the dedication ceremony, of which there's an image before you, of the Catani Clock Tower, it was the then chairman of the St Kilda Shore Committee, Councillor Edward O'Donnell, that had the honour of unveiling the bronze bust, and indeed to start the clock's mechanism that has not
that has not ceased for 86 years this month in 3 weeks' time. May it be your honour to support Councillor Brand's motion this 100th year since Catani's passing. Councillors, the beautiful clock tower bronze grillwork windows call out to fulfil their intended destiny. Give them the peal of chiming bells that they may greet each hour as Carlo Catani had intended. The also once chairman of the St Kilda Shore Committee, Frederick David Michaelis, who was the then chairman of the Carlo Catani Memorial Committee, had these words to say at that event: that the tower was a worthy memorial to a worthy friend of St Kilda. After all this is taken into consideration, I pray that you will also find this motion worthy of your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Herman. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford?
I may be stepping ahead with logistics. When you install a bell tower, can you control the loudness of the bells these days with modern technology? Given that I can imagine the noise complaints that already we may get. I'm just curious in terms of the I don't know much about bell towers at all.
Ms Strano?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The volume and frequency can be controlled through digital technology. Yep. And the direction. Oh, and direction. Because of speakers. Mm.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Pearl, would you like to ask that question? Is it a real bell?
Through you, Madam Mayor, some initial discussions have been had with Ingrams, who are the original contractors with the bell, and they're the most expert in this area, and they've done a lot of bells. Digital technology is what's used most often. It doesn't mean that real bells can't be used. It would be a completely different project, but it could be something that would be looked into as well. But Ingrams had recommended the digital technology as being the most flexible and cost-effective way.
Any other questions, councillors? So, Councillor Brand, would you like to move your motion?
Turn that on. I, Councillor David Brand, give notion that I intend to move the motion outlined below at the ordinary meeting of Council on the 1st of August 2008. That Council, 1. Notes the extraordinary contribution made to the beauty and utility of this city's foreshore and public reserves by the late Carlo Catani, the centenary of whose death in July 1918 we are commemorating through a series of events this year. 2. Requests that officers investigate the feasibility of installing a bell chime in the Catani Memorial Clock Tower on the Esplanade as a completion of Catani's long-held vision for the St Kilda Foreshore precinct he designed. And 3, requests officers to report back to Council on the technical requirements and timing issues involved, strategies for an effective community consultation, the policy alignments of such a project with the current Council plan, the costs involved and the possible sources of funding for the project.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, look, I've got a lot of explanation to make, and I think I'll leave the biographical background of Carlo Catani to have that Mr Herman has already alluded to rather beautifully, but I will just read out some of the information that that has accompanied this notice of motion, partly because It was an early draft that was published on the web before, and I would probably like to put this on the record now as a correct version. And I'll just talk about the actual idea of the clock tower rather than Catani himself. Catani's vision for the St Kilda Foreshore set down the fundamental aesthetic principles upon which its continuing fame and popularity are based. As part of his vision for the St Kilda Foreshore, as a cosmopolitan Mediterranean-style entertainment and promenading parkscape, Catani pictured a prominent public clock tower as its centrepiece. The clock tower was delivered posthumously by the City of Port Phillip and the Foreshore Committee in 1932 in honour of his service. At that time, to keep costs down, the brief for the design competition of the memorial clock tower did not require a bell chime. The winning architect, Norman Schafferl, did, however, allow for a future fitting of a bell chime, as evidenced by the large grilled openings on each side of the tower just below the clock faces, and we've seen pictures of that. The Memorial Clock Tower Committee sought costings for the additional mechanism, but it is not known why the bell chime was not proceeded with. The onset of the Great Depression may have been a factor. The idea of a new chime installation is consistent with the scope of the committee's thinking and the architect's design intent and the long-held foreshore vision of Catani himself. 3 objectives would be served. 1, to introduce a village bell, in a sense, into St Kilda's central public domain. 2, to complete the original vision of the heritage clock tower and also to endow Catani's foreshore with an enduring commemoration of the centenary of his death. It is contended that the initiative would make a significant contribution to the realisation of Council's policy objectives in placemaking, community development and heritage enhancement. Through history, the ringing from a bell tower has bound communities together. A simple chime, heard by a multitude in their individual pursuits, brings a brief moment of consciousness of a place and a community in common. This momentary shared experience might be enjoyed as much by the general public on St Kilda Beach as the residential community of St Kilda Hill. Key to the community consultation on this will be the Esplanade market traders and the residents of the Bayview apartment block across the road, which is the resident community who will be most closely affected by the chiming. Their experience of the bell chime will be key to calibrating its performance. And also note that the proposal is comparable to the South Melbourne Town Hall clock tower with its digitally controlled electronic bell chimes, which are quiet through the small hours of the night. This proposal has arisen from the community. It is an inessential but beautiful idea, one which might be shared and enjoyed by all the various and diverse communities of this renowned precinct. I'd also just want to note, since the question has come up about whether it's a real bell or an electronic bell, and I have written it with the express intention of being ambiguous on that I think it allows for both possibilities to be explored. I think that there's an obvious reason for making it a real bell, but there are lots and lots of interesting and convincing reasons why an electronic one might be actually better. But we will leave that up to the officers to come back with a full range of recommendations on that. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
Look, David spoke beautifully and summarised it all. All I want to say is I think that the sound as well as design is part of a place, and why can't a sound be beautiful? The other thing that strikes me about this idea is that there are a number of uncompleted buildings in Victoria, Parliament House, St Kilda Town Hall, and in terms of the chimes, this bell tower. So I think it's actually a noble cause to complete these beautiful heritage buildings if we can. It will attract attention to this building, and that's a great thing, because one of the idioms, the architectural idioms of the St Kilda Foreshore is the cupola. So we see the cupola on the sea bars, we see the cupola on the Palais, we see the cupolas on Luna Park. Yeah, so I think it's important.
Cupola, it's a thing.
A hat. You know, a dome. So, onion-shaped dome. So I think it's a legitimate thing to attract attention to this architectural feature of the foreshore. And I actually do support a digital response so that we can turn it off, because it can go from a beautiful, quaint thing to that bloody noisy bell in the space, you know, as soon as we hit 9 eyes time. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea, great resolution, and I congratulate both Isaac and Councillor Brand.
Councillor Simic.
Just like the bell, hopefully one day will. Both Councillor Brand and Councillor Gross have made some beautiful noises tonight. Look, I think it's there's really absolutely no denying the impact that Carlo Catani's had on our municipality and indeed broader Victoria. I think that commemorating his work, his contribution is completely appropriate. I thank Mr. Herman for the work he's done in drawing together many different parties already to look at different ways that some of that commemoration can take place on this 100th anniversary. And thank Councillor Brand for bringing this motion to us tonight. I do certainly hope that we can make progress here and that we can work towards some beautiful sounds emanating from that bell tower. Thank you.
Councillor Copsey.
Mr. Herman found his voice, but I've lost mine. So I just really briefly wanted to thank you very much for all of the work that you've been doing to bring parties together, including council, to commemorate the centenary. It's really important that we acknowledge the impact that Mr. Catani had on our local landscape, and I think that this is a beautiful idea for doing that. Thank you, Councillor Brand, for the motion. I'm happy to support it, and I do hope that the feasibility results in a workable solution to get this through. Thank you.
Councillor Pearl.
Councillor Brown, I think Norman would be very proud of you tonight, and I think it's a huge compliment from one architect to another to do something like this to finish somebody else's work. So well, potentially in any case, but well done. On the South Melbourne bell, I know there's a lot of residents that have called me over the time that would be happy to see that bell move down to St Kilda. I can hear it very clearly from my house, which is some distance away. But I think it's just, the South Melbourne bell, for the record, should stay exactly put where it is, and I'm perfectly fine with the chime, as I tell the people when they call me. But it's also pertinent to reflect on Catani's legacy and what he would think if he jumped in his time machine and was able to come back to today and had a look at that foreshore. And it's something not necessarily we should be driven by or guided by, but it's something we should take into consideration about the historic relevance of that place and where the historic future of it goes. And small decisions we make here and larger ones obviously have a huge impact in the 50 to 100 years that come by. So particularly that area needs some hard work and attention done to it in particularly probably the next decade to come. And hopefully this council is up to it. But well done, Councillor Brandon. I think in particular Norman would be very proud of your efforts here, and you should be very proud of yourself also.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, look, I think this is a great motion. There's mixed feelings about bell chimes, obviously, when I lived in South Melbourne, I had no problem with the bell chime there. But my brother messaged me when he saw this motion yesterday and said that he lives in Salzburg and he can't. He's driven mad by bells constantly. But presumably that's a scale thing. There's so many there. But what I would say is that this clock tower is a really, really special place, even to people who don't understand the historical significance of it or really know anything about Carlo Catani. So I spent a lot of time in St Kilda in my youth and my teenage years as well, and it was a place that stood out, that was a gathering place, that was a way to mark sort of where you were. At the time I was a visitor to St Kilda, I didn't know it as well, but I could always spot the clock tower and go there. And it really is a very special place, and it actually does bring people to it. I'm always seeing people around there, and I was there on Saturday with my kids. So anything that can enhance that clock tower's role in bringing people together. Again, opinions will differ as to whether a chime does that, but I think it's lovely. I think would be something that I would support. So aside from all of the historical reasons why this should happen, and I thank Mr Herman for sort of working so hard on that, even if there wasn't all of that, I think this would probably still be a good idea just because of the special place that the clock tower actually has in our city to all sorts of people, regardless of whether they know why it's there or not.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak? Would you like to close?
Yes, I'd like to say that I appreciate Councillor Baxter's point. It's very, very true that most architecture, or the vast majority of architecture and landscape, is appreciated by people who, with no explicit historical or technical or theoretical knowledge about it at all. And that is the audience that this has to appeal to. It's not a specialist thing. It's appeal to. I'm a. Oh no. So it's a point very well made, and I also want to thank Councillor Gross for his expression of his often hidden architectural literacy. But you put it very, very well to just the beauty of it. I want to thank you for all of the congratulations that you've been pouring upon me. I want to gather them up, and I do want to say that they actually belong much more to Isaac Herman and the committee for the commemoration of Carlo Catani. I'm just their channel mouthpiece in council in this particular case. But the moment that it was a number of suggestions that have come from the committee, and the moment it was put to me, it just struck me. Oh God, there we go. It just struck me as just a beautiful, almost irresistible idea, even though it's completely inessential to us, really. And I just thought, well, that's something which is really worth giving a go. A ringing endorsement. Thank you very much. Oh God. So I think that's all I have to say, but thank you very, very much for your support, and thank you very much to Isaac and the committee and for all the things that are going to happen this year in memory of Carlo Catani. I think I do want to say that the memory of Carlo Catani does actually draw the whole community together. When people hear about him, they know about him. Well, we know about him because he's already mentioned in the Catani Gardens and what have you. He's a mysterious figure to some, and the more that you know about him, the more endearing he is, and the more the more we enjoy the place that he basically designed for us. So there we are. There's another, hopefully another little chapter in that, right on the 100th, on the stroke of 100.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Well done. Thank you. So we move to item 16, reports by councillor delegates. Councillors, do you have any reports to make on any meetings or committees that you've attended? Okay, then we'll move to item 17, which is urgent business. Councillors, we've got one item of urgent business tonight. I need a mover and a seconder for council to consider the an item. So Councillor Bond and Councillor Simic to second. All those in favour? That's carried. I'll now call on a councillor to move a motion in relation to an urgent item of business.
I'd like to move that Councillor Gross, as Acting Deputy Mayor, be appointed to chair the meeting on the 15th of August.
Councillor Simic has moved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Copsey has seconded. Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I will put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillors, are there any other items of urgent business? Then we'll move to item 18, which is confidential matters. And we've got one item tonight relating to the provision of bike riding along St Kilda Road. I'll call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to members of the public. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Pearl to second. So that's in accordance with 89(2)E of the Local Government Act 1989, because it relates to proposed development. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. I'll wait till the gallery is cleared. Good night, Teresa. And the doors are closed.